Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
Stay that way because I like it like that.
Hello, and welcome to the Larry Yates Is It Show. This is a sunny day in California. I hope life is good for everyone. This is Reverend Carolyn Wilkins as guest host today. While Larry is still traveling, he sends his greetings and hopes everyone is doing well. We have a powerful show today following up on the series, How Did We Get Here? We've had notes from people that say the How Did We Get Here series is really quite effective, and I'm glad we're able to contribute. Last week, we talked about Martin Luther King, the 50th anniversary of his assassination, and looked at equality, justice, and violence in this country. And today we're going to tackle a subject that is near and dear to my heart. And it's how did we get here? And it's talking about the women behind the movement, the unsung women of merit, whose names you may not know, whose activities you may not know, but they made a significant difference in what life is like today. Some of them have stood by and been a part of their husbands' campaigns. Some did their own work, but the work would not have been done if they were not a part of it. So we're going to get started, and we have a top 12 that we're going to look at, and we're also going to look at some of the musical geniuses behind the civil rights movement. So we're going to start initially with two names that you probably do know. The first is Coretta Scott King. Coretta Scott King, the wife of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She was his wife, the mother of his 3 children. And more importantly, she stood her own in making sure home ground was taken care of while he traveled all over the world. She was the one who was home when there were gunshots fired at his home. She was the one that was home that had to appease and work with the children when the marches were happening. And there were hundreds of calls that came to the house threatening his life and the life of his family. So I'd like to honor Coretta Scott King, who I had the opportunity to meet. She came to Agape International Spiritual Center several years ago when her daughter, who was here in Los Angeles, and I had the opportunity to meet with her, speak with her, and give her my humble gratitude for the work she had done. So I speak about Coretta Scott King truly with admiration, because not only did she stand for peace, justice, and nonviolence, but she took the mantle in creating the Martin Luther King holiday. We would not have had a holiday if she had not stood up and stepped up. And she garnered the support of people like many of the musicians. Why can't I think of his name? Here at K out in L.A., Stevie Wonder. I don't know why I couldn't think of it, but Stevie Wonder was one of the staunchest supporters for having a Martin Luther King holiday. And they actually had to work very hard to get the process done and make it a federal holiday. And Dr. King was the first African American to ever be honored and the first person honored outside of presidents to have their own holiday. So we want to say thank you to Coretta Scott King. The second image that is shown right now is that of Rosa Parks, our hit number 2. And I probably could have gone in reverse order like they do from 10 down to 1, but I'm going to do it in order of people that you may know their names. Rosa Parks is someone whose name you probably know. Most people know who she is, but they don't know about her. Rosa Parks was known as the woman who was on the bus who refused to give up her seat. And that's what people know about her. And a lot of times the story is told that she was tired one day and she was working and she didn't want to give up her seat. So she sat there and that started the boycott. But that's not the whole story. The whole story is that Rosa Parks is a very educated, highly educated woman who worked with the movement, with Dr. King, with Dr. James Lawson, and they had a strategy, and she worked in the office and was supportive of the movement. And they talked about what different people could do. So she was educated and understood that it was important that they make strategic moves in this civil rights movement. And as a result of her sitting and staying in her seat on the bus, they actually wound up boycotting with the bus boycott, which had to be very well coordinated because they needed people to help bus women who were houseworkers to their jobs so they wouldn't lose their jobs. They had to bus the men to their jobs and or through cars and carpools. They were doing carpooling at that time to get people safely to their places of work. So I honor Rosa Parks for her knowledge, her wisdom, her strategy, and her willingness to be the image of the civil rights movement. She's been honored many times, and I think the word is not as clear about the work she has done. So my hat's off to Rosa Parks. Now, as we go to some of these other names, you're probably going to say, Carolyn, who are you talking about? We've never heard of them. But that's why I'm on today. And I hope you'll enjoy as we move through these additional names. The other 2 women that you're seeing on the screen are the images of women who are also the wives of leaders. One is Mrs. Shabazz, who was the wife of Malcolm X. And Betty Shabazz was a very powerful and still is a very powerful woman who has done her own speaking, written books, again, brought the children through all the challenges of things that were going on. Her husband and Dr. King were killed very in close proximity to each other, and the two of them actually became friends. Betty Shabazz is also very well educated, very well spoken, and carried on the conversation about equality and justice. So it's not just someone who is there speaking on behalf of her husband. She has a mind of her own and continues to speak in the world and share what she knows about being a woman, being a Black woman, being a Muslim woman, and knowing that the legacy of her husband was one that can still be remembered as making change for the civil rights movement. You're looking now a little bit at Malcolm X. He's a young man when he was killed, but a very prominent man in the civil rights movement. Our next woman to be honored is Mahalia Evers. Mahalia Evers was actually recently in California at Pomona College, and I didn't get a chance to sit with her, but really supported the work that she was doing. Mahalia Evers is the wife of Medgar Evers. And in fact, I saw her recently on a program, and I want to correct what I just said, is Mrs. Mahalia Evers. And she made it a point of saying that she and her husband had such a wonderful relationship, and he knew he was getting into a very challenging situation in the South by him doing the work that he was doing. And he knew that he may be killed because he was in the deep South in Mississippi and Alabama. And the people who were against progress were very clear in saying, you need to stop doing what you're doing or we're going to take you out. And Mahalia Evers was killed. He was killed in Mississippi, and his wife was with him and knew she was going to have to carry the mantle. And she chose to carry the mantle after he was killed. But you know something? She's in her 80s now, and she's beautiful. She is articulate. She has been teaching and speaking over these last 50 years. And I want to bring to your attention this woman of prominence and merit who is still alive today, still has a message of peace and nonviolence, and has been an activist for over 70 years. So those four names are names that you may know. I'm going to go back and recount. So we talked about Coretta Scott King, Rosa Parks, Mahalia Evers, and Betty Shabazz. So now we're going to go into what might be considered unknown territory. And I'm going to look first at Dorothy Height. Dorothy Height is someone that I have had a chance to meet, and she is an amazing woman, always has a hat on, and she comes out of the world of I don't know if she was Baptist, but that's what Black women did going to church. They always had a big hat on. Dorothy Height was dubbed the godmother of our civil rights movement by President Obama in 2010. She was a leader that was the president of the National Council for Negro Women for 40 years. Now that in itself is legendary, because if any of you have been involved in any programs operations and organizations to lead and be effective for 40 years is quite something to be proud of. She was a contemporary of Martin Luther King Jr. and was on stage when he gave his iconic speech, the I Have a Dream speech in 1963. Any picture you'll see of King on that stage, you'll see Dorothy Height standing next to him. She was a staunch feminist, organized workshops to assist freedom schools, and provide for low-income families. Dorothy Height is one of the women we honor today. The next person I'd like to share is Diane Nash. Diane Nash was a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and a founding member in 1960. She coordinated and monitored lunch counter sit-ins and freedom rides. And that was quite a bit of work to do because there were a lot of people involved. There was a lot of training that needed to happen. And I know she worked specifically with Dr. Lawson and behind the scenes, but she was also one of the organizers that brought Martin Luther King Jr. to Montgomery, Alabama to support the riders, the Freedom Riders. Diane Nash was prominently featured in the film Selma. And if you saw that movie, you saw this wonderful woman who stood up, made decisions, and helped in the operations of what was going on with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was right there in the front helping to make all the decisions. So I salute Diane Nash. In this time that we have today, it's really interesting thinking about sharing all of these names with you. And I know the time's going to go by quickly, but I'd like you to really flow with me in knowing that we wouldn't be where we were if these women had not taken a stand and committed to the world that we're in. The next woman of power I want to mention is Amelia Boynton. When you see the image of Bloody Sunday, where the violent attacks on civil rights marches happened in Selma, from the march from Selma to Montgomery on March 7th, 1965, there was a black woman who was beaten unconscious and laying in the street. I get choked up when I think about what she dealt with. But she was beaten, and that woman was Amelia Boynton. Before that day, she and her husband Samuel sheltered young activists, such as members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was, in fact, one of the leaders who convinced Martin Luther King Jr. to come to Selma in the first place. She was also actually the first African-American woman to run as a Democratic congressional candidate in Alabama. She didn't win, but she managed to grasp 11% of the vote, which was huge. It would be huge today when people are running. But as a black woman, that was a huge accomplishment. So our hats are off to Amelia Boynton. I'm going to do the next person, and then after that we'll take a short break. Daisy Bates. She's a name that most people are not familiar with. But Daisy Bates is a leader who wanted to end segregation in Arkansas. And she was one of the most high-profile people in the Arkansas movement and was a guiding light in the Little Rock Nine. She, in fact, led the first 9 African American students enrolled in Little Rock Central High School in 1957, after first taking the school to court in 1954 for denying black students the right to go to school. And that was even after the Supreme Court called for an end to segregation. Daisy Bates. She stood at the beginning of that line of the Little Rock Nine. And she was also became the president of the Arkansas State Conference of the NAACP. Daisy Bates, a woman of power, a woman of merit, a woman who had the courage as a little girl to try to be a part of ending segregation. And what we know is that a lot of young people took part in the movement. And I'm happy to say that as we see the movement now for to get rid of gun violence, it's young people. They know they have a role, they're willing to take a role, and they can take homage in the fact that in the Selma work, in the Little Rock work, in the work in Montgomery, young people were a viable part of making a difference. We're going to take a short break and come back to Women of Power.
I was inside your soul the day that you appeared, my love. Contain your
this isn't Larry. This is Reverend Carolyn Wilkins. I have the honor of being the guest host today while Larry is traveling. And we have a show that I'm excited about, and I've gotten a few messages that people are appreciating what I'm sending out. The program is called How Did We Get Here, a part of that series that Larry started. And we're looking not at the controversy of how we got here, but we're looking at the celebration of how we got here. And these are women of merit and power, the women behind the civil rights movement. We just spent some time talking about some amazing women that many of you may know some of their names, but you may not have known what they did, because 4 of the women were the wives of the men who you know, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Malcolm X and Medgar Evers. And we also talked about Rosa Parks. But what is so amazing is that the woman was not just behind the man, but helped make the man. And the woman had their own movement and part that has not been recognized in history. So this is an attempt to right some wrongs and to be educational and transformational in how we talk about what our history is. So the next person I'd like to share with you is Fannie Lou Hamer, a name you might know. And if you're old enough, you might have actually seen her because she was at the 1964 Democratic Convention. And she was quite a force to be seen. She testified at the convention, and she was testifying about civil rights and the right to vote. She was encouraging people and recruiting people in Mississippi and all through the South. At one point of her activism, she was arrested and thrown into the Montgomery County Jail, where she and her comrades were viciously beaten. Fannie Lou Hamer. She continued on and actually founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which raised national attention on the deep discrimination in the South. She was a woman to be reckoned with, and in fact, where she wound up being a challenge is she got the spotlight at the 1964 convention, Democratic Convention, where she spoke about the experiences she had in Mississippi, and she chastised leaders for ignoring the way Black people were murdered for trying to exercise their rights. Sound familiar? Her question was, is this America? Is this America? Now, as much as an ally as we speak of Lyndon B. Johnson, he was not happy with her testimony and the potential controversy that it might stir up. And he actually called a last-minute press conference to distract from people watching her. And it wound up having the opposite effect because it got more live coverage than they ever anticipated. It backfired, and Hamer's stirring speech was aired on news programs anyway, sparking big support for the Mississippi organization. So our hats are off to Fannie Lou Hamer, the work that she did, where she stepped up, and how she stepped up. Our next woman of power and merit is Joanne Robinson. Joanne Robinson, I know a name we don't know. After Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her bus seat, Joanne Robinson jumped in to organize support for the Montgomery bus boycotts in 1955. She created thousands of flyers spreading the message of the boycotts to African Americans all over Alabama. Now, in today's world, doing 1,000 flyers, you can just create it on your PC or your iPad, print it, take it to one of the local print shops, and have it done in a matter of minutes. But at that time, that was not what happened. There were mimeograph machines, there was typesetting, there was all sorts of things that had to happen. And it took quite a while to print off 1,000 copies. But I'm saying that really in a funny way to jest, but it was really a very powerful effort for her to take that on. And she was a crucial member of the movement and assisted in the carpools that took people to and from work during the boycotts. I mentioned that earlier when I was mentioning Rosa Parks, that this was not a small effort. When you're talking about thousands of people who have to get to and from work, and I know no matter what city you live in, if there was a strike of the buses, you had to find different ways to get there. In this case, people intentionally boycotted the buses, and they did it for over a year. So hats off to Joanne Robinson, a woman of power and merit. Our next hero is a name that was even new to me, Yuri Kochiyama. She was immortalized in a 1965 photo as a woman who supported Malcolm X's head as he lay dying after being shot at a Harlem ballroom. When I went back to look at the pictures, I remember personally not wanting to look at the pictures because it was tough. I was captured by the words, the dignity, the power, and the significance of what Malcolm X was speaking about. He spoke up for the power and dignity of Black people. He spoke up intentionally about the power and dignity of Black men in particular who were not being treated with equality and justice. He spoke about rights for children. And he spoke from a standpoint as a Muslim in this country, and that was not received with respect or with honor. In fact, many of the Christian churches totally boycotted what he had to say and turned their backs on what he had to say. Yet there was an entire segment in our population who needed to be able to stand up. Jesse Jackson said, "I'm Black and I'm proud." James Brown sang the song, but Jesse Jackson did the words at rallies, at boycotts, at programs where they were trying to encourage men of color to know that they were valued, that they were okay. And you know what's so interesting is that there's really the same thing happening today because our young men are devalued, put in jail. They don't have jobs all the time, and they're often miseducated because they're not able to finish school appropriately. And as a result of a cycle of not finishing school, not having jobs that have substantive pay, a cycle of not being given position, not being there for their family because they may have been in jail, and then jail means you don't have housing, you don't have jobs again, and it's created a major problem for our young men. I don't want to get off the topic too much, but I want to go back to Yuri Kochiyama, because she was someone who was there with Malcolm X as he was speaking up and speaking out about how we can treat each other with humanity, with respect, with dignity, and that all our rights should be met. And that's a challenge that we are working on today, how our rights can be honored and respected. The next person I want to talk about is Septima Clark. She was once dubbed the mother of the movement by none other than Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. himself. Mrs. Clark was a teacher and leader in the education realm. The South Carolina native began volunteering for the NAACP in 1919, going on to lead civil rights workshops in Tennessee. She worked with Thurgood Marshall on getting equal pay for black teachers and even accompanied Martin Luther King to his Nobel Peace Prize ceremony. I know she's a name that you don't know. She's written in some history books, but not history books that are normally in our schools. A woman of power, a woman of merit, a woman of commitment, Septima Clark. So we have shared with you 12 powerful women, and there's a little more to go. After we take a break, we're going to come back and talk about the women and the music behind the movement.
Like a fire of transformation.
This is our praying out song, Mark. You like this song?
Through my core.
Mark, you like that?
Shining in the darkness, I can see the light ablaze. And this new territory is my strength, it is my way. Said this new territory is my strength, and now I pray. Well, I pray.
The best
the Larry Yates Is This show, and this is Reverend Carolyn Wilkins, sitting in for the infamous Larry Yates, host extraordinaire. And today's show is called How Did We Get Here? And we're honoring and recognizing women of power and merit, the women behind the civil rights movement. And I have been really honored to do this work, to look at those elders who stood before me, who walked before me, who said, I'm going to do this work. Because boycotting and marching is work. But it's something that you have to be committed to. And I'm going to speak shortly about a couple of different movements that you might even be able to be involved with as we are going through what's happening today. I know young people inspire us. Young people are doing a lot of work now in marching. The women's movement is there to march. But there's still some basic human rights, civil rights that we must continue to do our work around. So this next segment is looking at women of music, the women and the music behind the movement. Because when you go someplace, excuse me, when people went to the rallies, there was always a song. There was a song of Let Freedom Ring. There was a song of We Shall Overcome. There are songs of Letting My People Go. There are songs that took people to rise up and stand up. There were songs that were sung that would encourage young people to get on board, that would encourage older people to walk along with them. The movement would not have been as successful if there was not music involved. I'm going to talk about a few people who provided the music. One is the lady of music, Mahalia Jackson. Mahalia Jackson is really an operatic singer. It's one of the first who was shown on the Ed Sullivan Show. Had a magnificent voice, a magnificent range, and I believe was considered a contralto. Beautiful, beautiful voice. Mahalia Jackson, the singer of gospels, the singer, magnificent, who stood beside Martin Luther King and others. She was at the March on Washington, and she stood up and sang. As King spoke of Let Freedom Ring, she also sang about freedom. She sang about letting my people go. She sang gospels and spirituals and things that moved people. And when you do this kind of work, it's transformational work that has to come from the heart. It doesn't just come from the head, because if we think about it, we may not do it. But you have to be moved, and a lot of the movement came with the women and their song. Mahalia Jackson, a woman of power, a woman of note, a woman of merit. She was honored. She had gospel Grammy Awards awarded to her. And I know she was honored by several presidents with the magnificence of her voice. I honor Mahalia Jackson. A side note, her last years were spent on the East Coast in Connecticut, and I have a very interesting connection with her. My mother was a nurse and did special home duty nursing, and she was the nurse for Mahalia Jackson in her last year or so. So I knew her as a celebrity, and I also knew and prayed for her as she was declining, elevating in years and declining in health. But we held her in the highest level of respect, and she was treated like the queen that she was until her very last breath. So I can tell you that because I know that's the truth. Another singer that I want to bring to your attention is Lena Horne. Lena Horne and many other singers stopped what they were doing to join the movement. Lena Horne is a beautiful African-American woman, one of the first who was able to go to clubs like the Copacabana and clubs in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. She was, you all may know about Diana Ross, but Lena Horne was there first with sequin dresses and furs and jewelry. Beautiful, black, expressive, and an amazing singer. She joined the movement and made sure that some of the proceeds of the work she was doing went to support the movement for freedom. I honor Lena Horne, and she continued to do the work. She spoke and sat with presidents as they went forward, talking about civil rights, talking about women and their activities, and talking about the right to be free. Lena Horne, a woman of power and dignity, a woman with a strong voice and a strong sense of dignity and eloquence. Another name that I bring to you is we had a couple of the staple singers. And the staple singers were a group who included the father, but it was 3 young ladies who sang, and they were part of the civil rights movement. I know you all have heard about them because they're great gospel singers and have continued to sing and sing and sing for years and years and have won many awards. But the staple singers were just young girls when they stepped into the spotlight of the civil rights movement. This is something that many of you don't know, that Jesse Jackson helped to monitor and operationalize the work they were doing in marches and made sure that there were the right people there, made sure, took care of things behind the scenes to make sure that the VIPs were taken care of, to make sure there was music involved, and to really run some of the operations and be part of the strategy and the movement. We're talking about the women today, but I got to give a shout out to Jesse Jackson for the work he has done. Regardless of what you think about him, he's given his life. He's dedicated his life to making change and being a man of justice. So the staple singers, there's still their music. All of the music of the people that I talked about is still available. Mahalia Jackson, Lena Horne, the staple singers. And the last group that I want to share with you, someone that I know personally, and that is the Piperettes. The Piperettes were a group of young girls who were only like 16, 17, 18, when they were chosen by Jesse Jackson from volunteering to sing on behalf of the civil rights movement. And he wound up helping to choose 4 or 5 young ladies who had powerful voices. And they all have been professional singers in their own right. I know personally and have been involved with Brenda Lee Ager for the last 20 years or so. She is a phenomenal singer, had her own special career in her work She's won Grammys and done other work and has done popular music as well as now singing. She's done her own plays, her own music, and she's been on this show a couple of times. She has a one-woman show about her life, and there is an upcoming film that's going to be about the Piperettes that will be available in a couple of months, and we'll have her on the Larry Yates' show as soon as that film is made public. But Brenda Lee Ager was one of those young girls who was chosen to be part of the movement. She has been singing all of her life. And I dedicate this moment to Brenda and to the Piperettes and the work that they did, the joy that they brought to the movement. The music behind the movement made a difference. There are a lot of places I've gone that don't have music, and I don't necessarily stay. Especially when you're talking about young people, you want to get them excited, move them, and touch their hearts. And the music is the way to the heart. Before we end the program today, I'd like to turn your attention to two potential organizations, because what we're talking about is not only honoring women of the movement, but we're also talking about the activity of spiritual activism, sacred activism, moving forward in a way that allows us to make a difference. Sometimes we wind up angry. We can often be hurt, angry, disappointed, and discouraged by our political leaders, by Congress, by the president, by the Senate, by our local government, by the police. And what I know often happens is people get discouraged, they get disappointed, and they wind up complaining. But you know something? Complaining is not an answer. And we've actually gotten very effective at complaining, and technology has helped us because we can send tweets out, we can send Instagrams, we can send all sorts of things that help us share with the world how upset and angry we are. I'd like you to consider another way of being in the world, and that's in rising up, standing up, and standing for something, finding something that is important to you. I'm not saying you have to be for a cause that I'm excited about. I want you to find your own cause, because there's something within you that I know will make a difference. Whether it's the environment, children, education, whether you want to see trees growing, more schools, housing, ending homelessness, you choose it. Or if you think you don't want to keep doing the work, then provide funding to organizations that are doing the work. Maybe you want to make sure art is available. I saw a show this morning that had a nonprofit in Harlem that was supporting the work of great poets who were there. And somebody decided that they wanted to see that because the poets of Harlem had not been honored and recognized. So that's a social movement all by itself. They're teaching young people what's going on. But a way you can get involved intricately is an organization that I am part of, that I teach for, and it's called the Network of Spiritual Progressives. We teach a program called Spiritual Activism Beyond Resistance, and it's called Prophetic Empathy and Radical Love. The intent is integrating spirituality and activism to build a world of love and justice. it so coincides and vibrates with the work that I've been doing for the last 25 or 30 years. As a minister, I speak to people all the time about bringing love into whatever they're doing. Martin Luther King brought in love as the vehicle for everything we're doing, for nonviolence and moving forward. But what I want to emphasize today is that this training on nonviolence is 7 weeks. It's done online via Zoom as a platform, and you can be in the quiet of your home with your shoes off and go through the training. It's on spiritual activism. I encourage you to look at it. The website is www.spiritualprogressives.org/training. And that'll take you directly to the training page for you to be involved and sign up for the class. The second thing I want to bring up is the Poor People's Campaign. That's with Reverend Dr. William Barber. And there are campaigns happening all over this country. Just Google it, Poor People's Campaign, and you'll find something in your area. They're having trainings, they're doing marches, and they're trying to elevate the moral consciousness of this country. And I think they're right on time with the way conversations have gone, with the way we have had political leaders be irresponsible and undignified in the way they're handling themselves. So the time has gone by so quickly again. I hope you enjoyed the show. It was my pleasure and honor to share with you women of merit, women of power, the women behind the civil rights movement. This is Reverend Carolyn Wilkins signing off. I can be reached at revcwilkins@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. I'm available to do workshops and speeches and come to wherever you are to share the message of peace, love, dignity, and justice. Have a